Between 1837 and 1901, millions of young people navigated Victorian courtship, a minefield of strict rules, secret codes, and social death if you made one wrong move. The stakes were impossibly high, but somehow people still managed to flirt, fall in love, and get married without dying of embarrassment. Here's what dating was really like in the Victorian era. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. All right, let's head back to London, 1862. Trust me, it's gonna be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're gonna want to be cozy. It's 6:15 in the morning, and you're about to wake up as 19-year-old Eleanor Hartwell. Your eyes flutter open to the dim grey light filtering through heavy damask curtains. The first sensation is the chill. Your bedroom is freezing. Unlike your toasty modern bed with its memory foam and down comforter, you're lying on a horsehair mattress that's lumpy in all the wrong places. The sheets are cold and slightly damp from the morning fog that seeps through London's poorly insulated windows. You reach one arm out from under your woolen blanket and immediately regret it. The air feels like ice water against your skin. Your breath forms little clouds in the frigid bedroom. No central heating here, just the dying embers of last night's fire barely glowing in the small fireplace across the room. "Miss Eleanor, are you awake, miss?" The door creaks open, and your lady's maid, Martha, enters with a pitcher of lukewarm water. She's already been up for hours, hauling that water up 3 flights of stairs. "Your mother says today's the day, miss. The Chamberlain dinner party is tonight." And just like that, your stomach drops. Today is indeed the day, your official introduction to London society. The first dinner party of many during your first season, the formal beginning of the Victorian marriage market. "Martha," you whisper, "I think I'm going to be sick." Now, miss. Every young lady feels that way. But your mama says you're ready, and ready you'll be. You're not sure if you want to cry or scream. Unlike your comfortable modern dating life where you might swipe right or meet someone at school, Victorian dating is basically a full-contact sport with your reputation on the line. "Can you imagine?" Martha says as she pours the water into your wash basin. "Mr. Thornfield might be there tonight, the one your mamma says has 2,000 a year." She gives you a knowing look. See, that's the thing about Victorian courtship. It's never just about finding someone you like. It's about finding someone with the right income, the right family, the right everything. And everyone, absolutely everyone, will be watching your every move. Your mother has spent the past 3 years preparing you for this moment. Lessons in proper conversation, never too witty, never too dull. How to sit, stand, and walk. How to use cutlery in the correct order during a 12-course meal. How to dance without looking like you're enjoying it too much. How to show just enough ankle to be intriguing but not so much you'd be considered fast. The survival stakes are real. One wrong move, one misplaced word, one improper glance, and your entire future could crumble. Your family's reputation along with it. "Come now, miss, let's get you washed." Martha helps you out of bed, and the full weight of Victorian morning rituals begins. First, there's the washing with barely warm water in a small basin. Just your face and hands, mind you. Victorians weren't big on daily full-body bathing. You'd get a proper bath maybe once a week. I know your modern nose is wrinkling at the thought, but that was considered perfectly hygienic. Your mother wants you in the blue dress tonight, Martha says, laying out your undergarments. Says it brings out your eyes. In your head you're screaming, the blue one, with the whaleboned bodice that makes it impossible to breathe. But outwardly, you just nod. Survival in Victorian society means accepting physical discomfort as your constant companion. Breakfast is a quiet affair. Your father hides behind his newspaper while your mother quizzes you on the names of every eligible bachelor likely to attend tonight's dinner. Now remember, Eleanor, the Chamberlain's second son is in trade, so don't encourage him. But their eldest has prospects, and the Darlington boy might be there. Poor conversation, but excellent family connections. Oh, and if Mr. Thornfield attends, mind you don't appear too eager. You take a small bite of toast, not tasting it. Your stomach is in knots. Unlike modern dating, where you might text someone, "Hey, wanna grab coffee?" Victorian courtship is an elaborate chess game where you're not allowed to touch the pieces directly. Everything must be done through proper channels, at the right time, with the right witnesses. And Eleanor, your mother adds, lowering her voice, remember that a lady never initiates conversation with a gentleman unless properly introduced, and never, ever remain alone with a gentleman even for a moment. Yes, mother, you say automatically. So, what? People just never got to be alone together, you're probably wondering. Honestly, that's kind of the point. Victorian courtship was designed to prevent exactly what most modern dating is about. Getting to know someone one-on-one. Instead, you'd meet potential partners in strictly controlled environments with family members hovering like well-dressed vultures. The morning drags into afternoon and suddenly it's time to prepare for the dinner party. This isn't a quick shower and outfit change. Oh no, this is a 4-hour production. Martha draws you a lukewarm bath scented with rose water. You soak just long enough to take the London chill from your bones. Then begins the elaborate process of dressing. First, the chemise, a simple cotton shift that's the only barrier between your skin and everything else. Then cotton drawers with an open seam. Yes, Victorian underwear had a completely open crotch. Makes using the chamber pot easier when you're wearing 17 layers. Next comes the corset. Hold up. Let me paint you a picture of this torture device. A Victorian corset isn't that cute little lace-up thing you see in lingerie stores. It's a heavy, steel-boned contraption designed to force your body into the fashionable silhouette. Tiny waist, pushed-up bosom, straight posture. Deep breath in. Miss, Martha warns before pulling the laces. You inhale as much as you can, gripping the bedpost for support. Martha pulls. The corset tightens like a boa constrictor, squeezing your ribs until they feel like they're touching your spine. Your lungs can only fill halfway now. Your lower ribs might actually bruise. Again, miss, we need to get you down another inch for the blue dress. Another pull, another notch tighter. By the time Martha's satisfied, you can only take shallow breaths from the very top of your lungs. Your waist is now unnaturally tiny, your posture forcibly erect. This is how you'll spend the next 8 hours. Makes swiping on apps while lying on your couch in pajamas seem pretty appealing, right? But we're nowhere near done. Over the corset goes the crinoline, a cage-like structure made of steel hoops that will make your skirt bell out in that classic Victorian silhouette. It bounces as you walk, knocking against furniture and making it nearly impossible to pass through doorways without turning sideways. "Hold still, miss," Martha mutters, sliding petticoat after petticoat over the crinoline. Each layer adds weight. By the time she fastens the actual dress, the blue silk with its tight bodice and voluminous skirt, you're carrying an extra 15 pounds of fabric. Now for your hair. Martha sits you at the vanity and begins the painstaking process of arranging your locks. No quick ponytail here. Your hair is brushed, sectioned, curled with hot irons, pinned, and arranged in an elaborate style that shows both sophistication and maidenly modesty. The process takes nearly an hour. By the time you're deemed presentable, face lightly powdered, lips lightly rouged, but not too much or you'd be considered fast, hair arranged, dress fitted, gloves buttoned, small reticule prepared, you're exhausted, and the evening hasn't even begun. You look beautiful, Eleanor, your mother says when you descend the stairs. There's genuine pride in her voice, and for a moment you feel a flash of warmth. This is what she's prepared you for your entire life. Your father looks up from his pocket watch and smiles. "My girl's all grown up," he says, and you detect a hint of sadness. Once you enter society, once you find a match, you'll leave his protection for your husband's. That's the Victorian way. The carriage ride to the Chamberlain's home is silent, filled with nervous anticipation. You stare out the window at London's gas-lit streets, wondering which of the men you'll meet tonight might eventually become your husband. Because that's the end goal here. Not dating for fun, not seeing where things go, but marriage, preferably by the end of the season. The Chamberlain's townhouse is ablaze with light when you arrive. Footmen in livery stand at attention as carriages deposit finely dressed guests at the entrance. Your father hands you down from the carriage, careful not to wrinkle your dress. "Remember, chin up," your mother whispers as you approach the door, "and for heaven's sake don't talk about those books you're always reading. Men don't want a blue stocking." You take a deep breath, as deep as your corset allows, and enter the lion's den. The Chamberlain's drawing room is crowded with London's finest society. The air is thick with perfume, cologne, and the subtle scent of money. Crystal chandeliers throw dancing light across silk gowns and jewelled hair ornaments. The gentle murmur of proper conversation is punctuated by occasional polite laughter, and everyone, absolutely everyone, is watching everyone else. Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Chamberlain greets you at the door. How delightful you could come. The complicated dance begins immediately. Your mother expertly manoeuvres you through the crowd, making strategic introductions. You curtsy, smile, speak when spoken to, laugh softly at appropriate jokes, all while scanning the room for potential suitors through lowered lashes. Direct eye contact? Absolutely not. That would be considered forward. "Miss Hartwell, may I present Mr. James Thornfield?" Your host introduces a tall, dark-haired gentleman who looks to be in his late 20s. This is the man your mother mentioned. £2,000 a year and excellent family connections. You curtsy. He bows. "A pleasure." "Miss Hartwell," he says, his voice pleasantly deep. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thornfield," you respond, the practised words falling from your lips automatically. And that's it. That's the extent of your first interaction with a potential life partner. He moves on to the next introduction, and you're swept away to meet the next gentleman. This isn't like modern dating, where you might have a deep, hours-long conversation on your first meeting. Victorian introductions were brief, formal, and thoroughly supervised. You'd form your initial impression, and if interested, the gentleman would follow up by calling at your home, with your parents present, of course. Dinner is announced, and here comes another test. The seating arrangement is strictly determined by social rank. You're relieved when your host's son is assigned to escort you in, meaning you rank somewhere in the middle of the gathering. Not embarrassingly low, but not presumptively high either. The dining room takes your breath away, what little breath your corset allows. The table gleams with silver, crystal, and fine china. Multiple forks, spoons, and knives sit at each place setting, a minefield of potential etiquette disasters. You're seated between your escort and an older gentleman who, thankfully, seems content to focus on his food rather than conversation. Across from you sits Mr. Thornfield, who occasionally glances your way. In your head you're screaming, "This is how I die," by accidentally using the fish fork for meat or drinking from someone else's water glass. The first course arrives, clear soup. You carefully take your soup spoon, the correct one, thank God, and delicately sip from the side of the spoon, never the tip. One etiquette hurdle cleared, only 11 more courses to go. "Do you enjoy music, Miss Hartwell?" Mr. Thornfield asks suddenly from across the table. Every eye in the vicinity turns to you. This is a test. Say you love music too enthusiastically, and you might appear overeager. Dismiss it, and you seem uncultured. "I appreciate fine music, Mr. Thornfield," you respond carefully, "though I play only moderately well myself." He nods, seeming pleased with your answer. "Perhaps you might play for us after dinner." Your stomach sinks. Playing for a room of critical strangers is another Victorian courtship ritual you've been dreading, but refusal isn't an option. "If Mrs. Chamberlain wishes it, I would be honoured," you reply. Your mother, seated 4 places away, gives you an approving nod. You've navigated that exchange correctly. The meal progresses through course after elaborate course. Soup is followed by fish, then meat, then game, with palate cleansers and side dishes interspersed. Wine flows freely for the gentlemen, while ladies take only small sips. Becoming intoxicated would be a social disaster of the highest order. You're hyper-aware of every movement. Back straight, not that the corset gives you much choice. Elbows off the table, small bites, minimal chewing, no slurping, no reaching. Wait for each dish to be offered to you. Accept a little of everything, even if you dislike it. Never finish everything on your plate. That would suggest hunger or greed. Both unladylike. It's exhausting. Unlike your casual dinner date at a restaurant where you might order whatever you want and actually enjoy eating it, this Victorian dinner is an elaborate performance where food is merely a prop. By the 10th course, you're light-headed from the corset and the stress. But the night is far from over. After dinner, the ladies withdraw to the drawing room while the gentlemen remain for port and cigars. "You did well with Mr. Thornfield," your mother whispers as you sip tea in the drawing room. "He watched you throughout dinner." You feel a flutter of something, not quite excitement, not quite dread. Mr. Thornfield seemed pleasant enough, more interesting than the other gentlemen you've met. But is that enough to build a life upon? When the gentlemen rejoin the ladies half an hour later, Mrs. Chamberlain does indeed ask you to play the pianoforte. This is a standard Victorian courtship showcase, a chance to display your accomplishments while looking decorative. You sit at the instrument, arranging your skirts carefully, and begin to play a simple but pleasing melody. You're not particularly talented, but you've practiced enough to be competent. As you play, you're acutely aware of Mr. Thornfield standing nearby, turning pages for you. You play with feeling, Miss Hartwell, he says quietly when you finish. That's more important than technical perfection, I think. You glance up, surprised by his comment. That's not the standard compliment. You're kind to say so, Mr. Thornfield, you respond, careful not to show too much pleasure at his words. Not kind, he corrects gently, merely honest. Do you enjoy reading as well as music? Your mother's warning echoes in your mind, but something in his expression makes you answer truthfully. Yes, very much. His eyes light up with genuine interest. Then we must discuss books sometime, perhaps when I call on your family. And there it is, the first step in the Victorian courtship process. A gentleman asking permission to call on you at home. Your heart races, but outwardly you maintain perfect composure. My parents welcome visitors on Tuesday afternoons, you say, the formal response coming automatically. He smiles, bows slightly, and moves away. The entire exchange took less than 2 minutes, but it's enough to set the courtship wheels in motion. By midnight, you're back home, exhausted but unable to sleep as Martha helps unlace your corset. The relief is immediate and almost painful as blood rushes back to compressed areas. "Well, miss, how was it?" Martha asks, helping you into your nightgown. You think about the evening, the stress, the discomfort, the constant awareness of being watched and judged. But then you remember Mr. Thornfield's comment about reading, the genuine interest in his eyes. It was, you search for the right word, a beginning. As you slide between the cold sheets of your bed, you realize that Victorian courtship is a marathon, not a sprint. Tonight was just the first of many carefully orchestrated social encounters that might eventually lead to marriage. You drift off to sleep wondering what Mr. Thornfield likes to read, and whether Tuesday is too far away. And as for you, lying in your comfortable modern bed with no corset in sight, be grateful that your dating disasters involve awkward text messages rather than social ruin. The Victorians somehow found love despite the rules, or perhaps because of them. The anticipation, the careful dance of approach and retreat, the thrill of a meaningful glance across a crowded room. There was magic there, even among the constraints. Sleep well, dreaming of a time when a turned fan or a carefully placed flower could speak volumes more than any dating profile ever could. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. Eleanor spent the 3 days after the Chamberlain dinner in a state of nervous anticipation. Would Mr. Thornfield actually call? Had she imagined the interest in his eyes? Was her blue dress too forward? Not forward enough? The waiting game was a cornerstone of Victorian courtship, a far cry from today's instant text messages and dating apps. No, "Hey, I had fun last night" messages. No checking if he was active on social media. Just silence and endless speculation. "Your posture, Eleanor," Mother reminded her at breakfast Monday morning. A gentleman notices how a lady carries herself. Eleanor straightened her already straight spine, pushing her shoulders back. Even at home, the physical constraints of Victorian womanhood never relaxed. Your breath catches imagining being constantly aware of your posture, your facial expressions, your every movement being scrutinized. Not just on dates, all the time. "Now, I've instructed Mrs. Wilson to prepare the good tea service tomorrow," her mother continued, spreading a thin layer of marmalade on her toast. "And we'll have those small almond cakes. Nothing too elaborate. We don't want to appear as though we're trying to impress." The irony, of course, was that everything about Victorian courtship was designed to impress, while simultaneously pretending not to care. It was exhausting. "Of course, Mr. Thornfield may not be the only caller," her mother added with calculated casualness. "The Darlington boy seemed quite taken with you." Eleanor suppressed a grimace. "Mr. Braid." Darlington had indeed stared at her throughout dinner, but had spoken exactly 3 words to her. "Charmed, Miss Hartwell." Not exactly the foundation for lasting affection. "Mother," Eleanor ventured carefully, "do you think it proper to discuss books with Mr. Thornfield if he calls? He expressed an interest in literature." Her mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "A passing comment, I'm sure. Gentlemen prefer to lead the conversation, Eleanor. A few modest opinions are acceptable, but remember, men don't marry women who challenge them intellectually." That night, lying in her bed, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and whispered to herself, "What if I want someone who welcomes a challenge?" In your cosy modern bed, you're probably thinking, "Just be yourself, girl." But in Victorian England, being yourself was rarely an option, if yourself didn't conform to very specific standards. Tuesday morning dawned bright and clear, a rarity in London. Eleanor was up before Martha arrived, too nervous to sleep. The formal at-home hours for morning calls were between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, but preparation began much earlier. The house was in an uproar. Maids polished silver tea services, dusted ornaments, and arranged fresh flowers in the drawing room. The cook prepared delicate cakes and biscuits. Even Eleanor's father was banished to his club for the afternoon. Morning calls were strictly women's affairs. "Your Green Day dress, I think," her mother decided after breakfast, with the modest lace collar, fashionable but not too showy. Martha helped Eleanor dress with particular care. The green dress was mercifully lighter than her dinner gown, though still layered over a corset and petticoats. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, with a few loose curls framing her face, the Victorian version of "I woke up like this." "You look lovely, miss," Martha said, stepping back to admire her work. Not too eager, but pretty enough to catch any gentleman's eye. That was the perpetual balance, being attractive without seeming to try, interested without being forward, accomplished without being threatening. Modern dating has its complications, but at least you can text, "I had fun last night without risking social ruin." By 2 o'clock, Eleanor sat in the drawing room with her mother, ostensibly working on embroidery while her stomach twisted with nerves. The embroidery hoop provided something to do with her hands, but more importantly, it was an acceptable activity that could be quickly set aside when visitors arrived. "Remember to keep conversation light," her mother reminded her for the 10th time. "The weather, music, perhaps art if the gentleman seems cultured. Nothing controversial." "Yes, mother," Eleanor replied automatically, pricking her finger with the needle. A drop of blood welled up, and she quickly pressed her handkerchief to it. Blood on her embroidery would be noticed and remarked upon, possibly interpreted as carelessness, a quality no Victorian husband wanted in a wife. The clock ticked loudly in the silent room. 3 o'clock came and went, no visitors. "It's early yet," her mother said, her own needle moving steadily through the fabric. "Quality callers often come later in the afternoon." 3:15. 3:30. Nothing. Eleanor's hopes began to sink. She'd misinterpreted Mr. Thornfield's interest. Or worse. Her mother was right. No man wanted a woman who admitted to enjoying books. Then, at precisely 3:45, the doorbell rang. Both women froze, exchanged glances, then deliberately returned to their embroidery. Peering eager was the cardinal sin of Victorian courtship. A lady never rushed to the door, never showed excitement at a caller's arrival. That was what servants were for. Their butler, Harrison, appeared at the drawing-room door moments later bearing a small silver tray with a calling card. "Mr. James Thornfield," he announced solemnly. Eleanor's mother nodded regally. "We will receive him." "Now hold up. Let me explain how big a deal this little calling card was. In Victorian society, these small rectangles of cardstock were serious business. Basically, the original social network. A gentleman's card was rectangular and simple, with just his name, while a lady's was larger and more ornate. When Mr. Thornfield handed his card to Harrison, he was formally requesting permission to enter their home. Had Eleanor's mother been unimpressed by him, or thought him unsuitable, she could have instructed Harrison to say they were not at home. The polite fiction used to refuse callers without outright rejection. But she had accepted, the first small victory in the courtship dance. Harrison returned moments later with Mr. Thornfield, who stood formally in the doorway until invited further. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell," he said, bowing slightly. "I hope I find you well." "Quite well, thank you, Mr. Thornfield," Eleanor's mother replied. "Please do sit down." He sat in the chair indicated, opposite the sofa where Eleanor and her mother were seated. Close enough for conversation, but at a properly respectable distance. Every physical position in the Victorian drawing-room was calculated for propriety. "We are so pleased you could call," her mother continued, setting aside her embroidery. "Eleanor, dear, perhaps you might pour the tea." This was no small request. Pouring tea correctly was another test of a young lady's graces. Eleanor moved to the tea table, grateful that her hands weren't visibly shaking as she lifted the heavy silver teapot. "How do you take your tea, Mr. Thornfield?" she asked, proud of her steady voice. "Just a touch of milk, no sugar, thank you," he replied, watching her hands as she prepared the cup. The ritual of tea serving was elaborate and meaningful. As Eleanor handed him the cup, making sure their fingers didn't touch, as that would be scandalously forward, she noticed him studying her face with quiet interest. "I trust you've been enjoying the fine weather, Mr. Thornfield," her mother asked, launching into the mandatory discussion of meteorological conditions that began all proper Victorian conversations. "Indeed, Mrs. Hartwell, though I've been too occupied with business matters to fully appreciate it," he replied politely. For the next 15 minutes, Eleanor sat in near silence as her mother and Mr. Thornfield exchanged pleasantries about the weather, mutual acquaintances, and the previous night's concert at St. James's Hall. This was standard procedure. The first part of any call was directed by the senior lady present. Finally, her mother turned to Eleanor. "My daughter was quite impressed by the Chamberlain's musical selections the other evening. Weren't you, Eleanor?" This was her cue to enter the conversation, carefully, modestly, and without appearing too eager. "The Mozart was particularly well chosen," Eleanor offered. "Mr. Sect." Thornfield's expression brightened. "Do you enjoy Mozart, Miss Hartwell?" "I find his compositions most pleasing," she replied, the bland statement masking her genuine enthusiasm for music. "As do I, though I confess a preference for Beethoven's Passion," he said, then glanced at Mrs. Hartwell as if checking whether such a statement was acceptable. Eleanor's mother nodded slightly, granting permission for the conversation to continue in this vein. "And what of literature, Miss Hartwell?" Mr. Thornfield asked, returning to the topic he'd broached at the dinner party. "Have you read anything of note recently?" Eleanor hesitated, her mother's warning echoing in her mind. But something in Mr. Thornfield's expression, an earnestness, a genuine curiosity, emboldened her. "I recently finished The Mill on the Floss," she admitted, "though perhaps I shouldn't confess to reading such modern novels. In your head, you're thinking, George Eliot? That's her big scandalous reading." But in 1862, reading contemporary novels, especially those dealing with complex moral questions, wasn't considered entirely proper for young ladies. They were supposed to stick to improving religious texts and perhaps a bit of Jane Austen. "George Eliot has a remarkable insight into human nature," Mr. Thornfield replied, his eyes lighting up, "though I found the ending rather tragic. Do you prefer happier conclusions, Miss Hartwell?" Before Eleanor could answer, her mother interjected smoothly, "My daughter has always had a fondness for poetry. Perhaps you might recommend some suitable volumes, Mr. Thornfield. Something appropriately uplifting." And just like that, the conversation was steered back to safer waters. Eleanor shot Mr. Thornfield an apologetic glance, which he acknowledged with a slight smile. The remainder of the visit, precisely half an hour, the acceptable duration for a first call, passed in pleasant but controlled conversation. As it concluded, Mr. Thornfield stood and bowed. "Miss Hartwell, thank you for your hospitality. Might I have the pleasure of calling again next week?" "We are at home on Tuesdays and Thursdays," her mother replied, the standard formula neither directly accepting nor rejecting his request. After he departed, Eleanor's mother turned to her with a satisfied expression. "Well, that was most promising. He is clearly interested, and his manners are impeccable, though I would caution against appearing too learned, Eleanor. A gentleman appreciates refinement, not blue-stocking tendencies." Eleanor nodded obediently, but internally she was replaying the moment when Mr. Thornfield's eyes had lit up at the mention of George Eliot. Perhaps not all gentlemen wanted mindless companions after all. The following day brought more calling cards. Word had spread through London society that Eleanor Hartwell had made a favourable impression at the Chamberlain dinner. 3 different gentlemen left their cards while she and her mother were out paying their own calls. Because yes, that's another aspect of Victorian social life. Women also made calls on other women, usually returning visits from those who had called on them first. It was a never-ending cycle of social obligation, with strict rules about who called on whom, how long to stay, and how soon to return visits. "Mr. Darlington, Mr. Peters, and Mr. Sullivan," her mother read from the cards when they returned home. "All from good families. The season is going well for you, Eleanor." The following week brought more social engagements. Another dinner party, a musical evening, an afternoon garden party where Eleanor caught sight of Mr. Thornfield from across the lawn, but only managed to exchange a brief greeting. That's how Victorian courtship often progressed, in glimpses and moments, building anticipation through carefully orchestrated near misses. "Miss Hartwell," he said when they were briefly thrown together at the refreshment table, "I've been reading Tennyson's latest. I thought of your interest in poetry." "Have you found it enjoyable?" she asked, aware of at least 3 matrons watching their interaction with hawkish interest. "Immensely. Perhaps we might discuss it when I call tomorrow." "I look forward to it," she replied, then was immediately whisked away by her mother to meet an elderly countess. These tiny exchanges, These moments of connection, they were the building blocks of Victorian romance. No long, intimate conversations, no casual coffee dates, no private text messages, just public glimpses that slowly, gradually built interest and affection. When Tuesday came again, Eleanor found herself genuinely looking forward to Mr. Thornfield's call. This time she chose her own dress, a blue-green that complemented her eyes better than the plain green her mother had selected the week before. "That's rather bright for morning calls," her mother commented. "It's my favourite colour," Eleanor replied simply. Her mother sighed. "Very well, but do try to keep the conversation more general today. Mr. Thornfield seemed altogether too interested in your opinions on literature." "As if that were a bad thing, you're thinking. And you're right. By modern standards, a man being interested in a woman's thoughts is the bare minimum. But in Victorian society, it was somewhat unusual, even potentially threatening to the established order." When Mr. Thornfield arrived, precisely at the same time as his previous visit, Eleanor noted with pleasure that he was carrying a small wrapped package. After the initial greetings and tea-pouring ritual, he said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you'll forgive the liberty, but I've brought a volume of poetry I thought Miss Hartwell might enjoy." He presented the package to Eleanor's mother, not to Eleanor directly. Proper Victorian etiquette demanded that gifts to unmarried women be approved by their mothers first. Her mother unwrapped it carefully, a slim volume of Tennyson's Enoch Arden and other poems recently published. "How thoughtful," she said, examining the book before passing it to Eleanor. "My daughter is fond of poetry, as I mentioned." Eleanor accepted the book, careful not to appear too eager. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield. This is most kind. I've marked a few passages I found particularly moving," he said, "though I'd be interested in your opinion on the entire work." He was asking for her thoughts, her genuine opinions. In the highly restricted world of Victorian courtship, this was practically a declaration. "I'll be sure to read it carefully," she promised. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment something passed between them. Understanding, connection, possibility. Eleanor quickly looked away, conscious of her mother's watchful gaze. The rest of the visit proceeded much like the first, though this time Eleanor's mother allowed the conversation to linger on literature a bit longer before steering it toward the upcoming ball at Thornton House. "I believe you're acquainted with the Thorntons, Mr. Thornfield?" her mother inquired. "Indeed, Sir William and I share some business interests," he replied. "Their ball is always a highlight of the season." "Eleanor has just received her invitation," her mother said proudly. Being invited to the Thornton ball was a mark of social acceptance. "Perhaps you might request a dance, Mr. Thornfield?" This was forward, even for a mother, but Mrs. Hartwell clearly saw promising potential in Mr. Thornfield. "It would be my honour," he replied, glancing at Eleanor. "If Miss Hartwell would do me the kindness of saving me a space on her dance card." "I should be delighted," Eleanor said, the formal response belying the flutter in her chest. As Mr. Thornfield prepared to leave, having once again stayed exactly half an hour, he said, "Mrs. Hartwell, would you permit me to escort you and Miss Hartwell to the Phillips musical soiree on Friday evening? I understand it's to be a small gathering, and I believe we are all invited." This was a significant step forward in the courtship process. A gentleman offering to escort a young lady and her chaperone to an event indicated serious interest. Not quite a declaration, but certainly more than casual acquaintance. Her mother beamed. "How kind of you to offer, Mr. Thornfield. We would be most pleased to accept." After he left, her mother was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Well, Eleanor, it seems Mr. Thornfield is quite taken with you. An escort to the Phillips's soirée, a dance promised at the Thornton ball. These are not casual attentions." Eleanor ran her fingers over the cover of the poetry book. "He seems different from other gentlemen." "Different?" Her mother frowned slightly. "In what way?" "He appears genuinely interested in conversation," Eleanor said carefully. "In ideas?" Her mother looked thoughtful. "Well, he is somewhat older, perhaps nearly 30. More established men can afford to be a bit unconventional. But mind you don't encourage too much intellectual discussion, Eleanor. A gentleman may enjoy the novelty of a clever comment or two, but for marriage they want someone soothing and agreeable." That night, alone in her room, Eleanor lit an extra candle and opened the book Mr. Thornfield had given her. Several pages were marked with tiny pencil dots, easily erased, leaving no evidence for prying eyes. Smart man, she thought with a smile. The marked passages were beautiful. Lines about courage and conviction, about seeing beyond society's constraints. Was he sending her a message? Or was she reading too much into a simple gift? Eleanor fell asleep with the book beside her pillow, dreaming of conversations that might be possible beyond the restrictive confines of the drawing room. In a world where courtship proceeded at a glacial pace through rigidly controlled encounters, the simple gift of a book with marked passages felt almost scandalously intimate. As for you, drifting off in your modern bed, imagine a world where a shared literary reference was as thrilling as a first kiss, where the brush of gloved fingers during a teacup exchange sent hearts racing. Victorian courtship may have been ridiculously formal, but perhaps there's something to be said for the slow burn of carefully cultivated anticipation. In our next chapter, Eleanor will discover there's more to Victorian flirtation than just calling cards and chaperoned visits. The secret languages of fans, flowers, and gloves allowed couples to communicate under the very noses of their watchful chaperones. A Victorian workaround to all those rules we've been talking about. Sleep well, and maybe consider sending that person you're interested in a book instead of a text tomorrow. Some courtship traditions are worth reviving, even if we happily leave the corsets in the past. Friday evening arrived, and with it the Phillips musical soirée. For Eleanor it marked a significant milestone, her first public appearance with Mr. Thornfield as their escort. Not quite a declaration, but definitely a statement to society that he had a particular interest in the Hartwell family. "Remember, Eleanor," her mother coached as Martha arranged her hair. "It's acceptable to show some animation during musical performances, but never excessive emotion. A gentle smile, perhaps a slight swaying to the rhythm. Nothing more." The rules for public behaviour were exhaustingly specific. Each gesture, each expression was coded and meaningful. Unlike today, where you might text, "That was amazing," after a concert or post a video of yourself dancing, Victorians communicated their feeling through subtle, almost imperceptible signals. "And your fan," her mother continued, holding up the delicate ivory and lace accessory. "Use it judiciously." "Oh, the fan." That innocent-looking accessory was actually one of the most powerful communication tools in a Victorian woman's arsenal. In a society where direct speech was restricted, where couples were rarely alone, and where every word was monitored, The language of the fan offered a secret pathway to express feelings that could never be spoken aloud. "I've had quite enough of fan etiquette, Mother," Eleanor said, immediately regretting her sharp tone. Her mother raised an eyebrow. "Clearly not, if you're taking that tone. The fan is not merely for cooling oneself, Eleanor. It speaks volumes to those who understand its language. You're probably rolling your eyes in your cozy modern bed, thinking this sounds ridiculous. But imagine being watched constantly, your every word analyzed. You'd develop secret codes too." "Now," her mother demonstrated, opening the fan fully and fanning slowly. "This indicates you are engaged but available for conversation. Fanning quickly suggests agitation, to be avoided unless deliberately signaling distress. Closing the fan and tapping your palm means, 'I wish to speak with you.'" Eleanor sighed inwardly. She'd been drilled in fan language since she was 15, but her mother never tired of refreshing the lessons before important social events. "Drawing the fan across your cheek means 'I love you,'" her mother continued, "which you will absolutely not do under any circumstances. Mother, I hardly think the language of the fan is both powerful and dangerous, Eleanor. One wrong movement and your reputation could be compromised. Remember Lady Ainsworth's daughter last season? One careless fan gesture, interpreted by society as a declaration, and she was forced to marry a man she scarcely knew. That shut Eleanor up. Victorian courtship wasn't just about finding love. It was about survival in a society where women had few options and reputation was everything. When Mr. Thornfield arrived to escort them, Eleanor noted with interest that he carried a bouquet, not large or ostentatious, but a small, carefully arranged collection of flowers tied with a simple ribbon. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell," he greeted them with a bow. "You both look lovely this evening. I took the liberty of bringing these." He presented the bouquet to Eleanor's mother. Again, proper etiquette dictated gifts go through the chaperone first. Her mother examined the bouquet with a knowing eye. "How thoughtful, Mr. Thornfield. Quite a charming selection." She handed the flowers to Eleanor, who received them with carefully modulated pleasure. Not too eager, not too indifferent. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield," she said. "They're beautiful." And they were. A tasteful arrangement of white roses, forget-me-nots, and lily of the valley, with a sprig of myrtle tucked almost invisibly among the blooms. To the casual observer, simply a pretty bouquet. But to anyone versed in floriography, the language of flowers, the message was clear. White roses for innocence and charm, forget-me-nots for true love and remembrance, lily of the valley for sweetness and the return of happiness, and myrtle, the most telling inclusion, for love and marriage. Eleanor's cheeks warmed slightly as she recognized the message. Mr. Thornfield was no amateur at the courtship game. He was telling her, in the most proper yet unmistakable way, that his intentions were serious. "I shall put these in water before we depart," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Allow me, Miss Eleanor," Martha said, taking the bouquet. She gave Eleanor a significant look. Martha, like most ladies' maids, was well versed in floral symbolism. Nothing escaped her notice. "Shall we?" Mr. Thornfield offered his arm to Mrs. Hartwell, as was proper. Eleanor would follow slightly behind, maintaining the appearance that it was her mother he was primarily escorting. The Phillips home was already crowded when they arrived. Musical soirees were smaller than balls, but still significant social events. with perhaps 40 or 50 guests instead of hundreds. A string quartet played in one corner of the drawing room, while clusters of people conversed in hushed tones. Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thornfield. Mrs. Phillips greeted them warmly. How delightful you could come. We're just about to begin the first performance. They were shown to seats near the centre of the room, a mark of status. Eleanor sat beside her mother, with Mr. Thornfield on her mother's other side. Even here they would not sit directly next to each other. As the first performer, a young lady with a passable soprano voice began to sing, Eleanor felt a strange prickling sensation. She was being watched. Glancing discreetly around the room, she caught the eye of Mr. Darlington, who had called at their home twice now. He nodded slightly, his gaze intense. Eleanor returned her attention to the singer, uncomfortable with Mr. Darlington's scrutiny. When the song ended, she applauded politely, then opened her fan, the signal that she was engaged but open to conversation. During the brief intermission between performances, Mr. Thornfield made his way to their seats. Miss Hartwell, are you enjoying the music? He asked, standing at a proper distance. Very much, she replied. Miss Thompson has a lovely voice. Indeed, he paused. I see you brought your fan this evening. Eleanor's heart quickened. Was he acknowledging that he understood fan language? It can be rather warm in crowded rooms, she said carefully. Indeed it can, he agreed, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. One must have ways to remain comfortable while still observing proprieties. Before she could respond, Mr. Darlington approached, inserting himself into their conversation, with barely a nod to Mr. Thornfield. Miss Hartwell, how charming you look this evening, he said, standing slightly too close. That shade of blue is most becoming. Thank you, Mr. Sut. Darlington, Eleanor replied, instinctively closing her fan partially, the signal that she wished to speak to him but not alone. Mr. Darlington either didn't know fan language or chose to ignore it. I had hoped to see you at Lady Russell's garden party yesterday. We had a prior engagement, Eleanor said, glancing at her mother for rescue. Mrs. Hartwell was deep in conversation with an elderly matron and didn't notice her daughter's predicament. Mr. Thornfield, however, did. I believe the next performance is about to begin, he said smoothly. Miss Hartwell, might I escort you to your seat? Thank you, Mr. Thornfield, Eleanor said gratefully, accepting his arm in one of the few instances where a physical connection was permitted, the brief escort back to a seat in a crowded room. As they moved through the crowd, Eleanor felt Mr. Thornfield slip something into her hand, a small folded note. Her breath caught. Passing notes was scandalously forward, potentially ruinous if observed. She discreetly tucked it into her glove, heart pounding. The Victorian glove was another tool of secret communication. Messages could be hidden within them, and the way one wore or adjusted gloves sent signals. Dropping a glove was an invitation to a man to pick it up, and thereby publicly declare his interest. Once seated again beside her mother, Eleanor waited through the entire next performance, an interminable pianoforte piece that seemed to have no end, before she could risk reading the note. During the enthusiastic applause that followed, she pretended to adjust her glove and unfolded the tiny paper. In a neat, masculine hand were written 4 words, Library, after next song. Eleanor nearly gasped aloud. He was suggesting they meet privately, a shocking breach of propriety that could ruin her reputation if discovered. Yet the thrill that coursed through her veins was undeniable. She glanced at Mr. Thornfield, who was watching her from across the room. He raised an eyebrow slightly, a question. In response, she touched her closed fan to her right cheek, the signal for yes. For the next 15 minutes, Eleanor could barely focus on the music. Her mind raced with both excitement and trepidation. Meeting unchaperoned even briefly was dangerous. Yet she found herself counting the minutes until she could reasonably excuse herself. When the song ended, she leaned toward her mother. "I need to visit the ladies' retiring room," she whispered. Her mother nodded absently, absorbed in the music. "Don't be long." Eleanor made her way out of the drawing room, heart hammering against her ribs. The Phillips Library was down the hall. She'd visited this house before and knew its layout. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, she slipped inside the dimly lit room. Mr. Thornfield was already there, standing by the window. He turned as she entered, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Miss Hartwell," he said softly, "I feared you wouldn't come." "This is most improper," Eleanor whispered, staying near the door. "If we're discovered—" "I know," he interrupted. "Believe me, I wouldn't risk your reputation without good reason, but I needed to speak with you away from prying ears and watching eyes." Eleanor glanced nervously at the door. "We have perhaps 2 minutes before my absence is noted." Mr. Thornfield nodded, moving a step closer, still maintaining a respectable distance, but close enough that they could speak in hushed tones. "I wanted to be sure you understood the message in the flowers," he said. "Sometimes these symbols can be misinterpreted." "Oh, you're wondering if he's about to backtrack, aren't you? In your bed in 2025, you're probably thinking he's going to give some excuse, some 'it's not you, it's me' Victorian-style letdown." "The myrtle was perhaps too forward," he continued. "But I wanted to be clear about my intentions, Miss Hartwell. I find you quite unlike anyone I've met before." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "In what way?" "You have a mind of your own. You read George Eliot," he said with a small smile. "You're not merely parroting opinions you've been taught." "Many would consider that a fault in a woman," she said carefully. "I am not many," he replied simply. "I seek a partner, not an ornament." The word partner hung in the air between them, radical, almost revolutionary in a society where wives were legally considered property. "Mr. Thornfield, James," he said quietly. "My name is James." The use of his Christian name was another boundary crossed, intimate, personal. In public, they would remain Mr. Thornfield and Miss Hartwell until an engagement was announced. But here, in this stolen moment, they stepped beyond society's rigid formalities. "James," Eleanor said, testing the name on her lips. "I should return before I'm missed." He nodded. "Of course, but first—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, pressing it into her hand. "For your fan." Eleanor glanced down. It was a small charm, the kind that could be attached decoratively to a fan's ribbon. A tiny silver book. The message couldn't be clearer. He valued her mind, her love of reading. "Thank you," she whispered, deeply moved by the thoughtful gesture. "We should return separately," he said, practical despite the emotion of the moment. "Wait 2 minutes after I leave." Eleanor nodded, tucking the charm into her glove alongside the note. More secrets to hide. More coded messages to cherish. After he left, she counted slowly to 120, composing herself before returning to the drawing room. Her mother gave her a questioning look as she took her seat. "You were gone quite a while," she observed. "There was a line," Eleanor lied smoothly. feeling a twinge of guilt. She'd never deceived her mother before, yet here she was, hiding notes and charms and secret meetings. But that was Victorian courtship, a dance between public propriety and private connection, between social rules and personal desires. The elaborate codes of fans and flowers and gloves existed precisely because the rules were so restrictive that couples needed alternative means of communication. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Eleanor was hyper-aware of Mr. Thornfield's presence across the room, of the weight of the charm in her glove, of the secret they now shared. When he escorted them home, everything was perfectly proper. He handed Mrs. Hartwell down from the carriage, bowed formally at their door, thanked them for the pleasure of their company. Yet when he took Eleanor's hand to help her from the carriage, he pressed it slightly. Another silent message that meant everything to her and would be invisible to observers. "Until the Thornton ball," he said as he departed. "I believe you promised me a dance, Miss Hartwell." "Indeed I did, Mr. Thornfield," she replied, the formal words belying the warmth in her eyes. Once in her bedroom, with Martha helping her undress, Eleanor finally had a chance to examine the charm properly. It was exquisitely made, clearly expensive despite its small size. "That's a lovely trinket, miss," Martha commented, eyeing it curiously. "A gift?" "Yes," Eleanor admitted, seeing no point in hiding it from Martha, who knew all her secrets anyway. "From Mr. Thornfield." Martha smiled knowingly as she unlaced Eleanor's corset. "He seems a good sort, not like that Mr. Darlington who keeps calling. There's something not quite right about that one, if you don't mind my saying so." "I don't mind at all," Eleanor said, breathing deeply as the corset loosened. "I find Mr. Darlington rather intense." "Some might call it persistent," Martha observed, helping Eleanor into her nightgown. "Some might call it something else entirely." Eleanor sat at her vanity as Martha brushed out her hair. "What do you mean?" "Just that Mr. Darlington has been asking questions about you in the servants' hall when he calls. Wants to know your habits, your preferences. More than usual interest, if you take my meaning." This was concerning. The servants' network was an invisible but powerful force in Victorian society. Information flowed freely below stairs, and a gentleman pressing servants for details about a young lady was overstepping boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Martha," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "I'll be careful round him." After Martha left, Eleanor examined her bouquet, now arranged in a vase on her nightstand. The flowers were beginning to droop slightly, their message fading with their freshness. But the charm, that was permanent, a token she could keep. She attached it to her fan's tassel, where it would be visible to those who knew to look for it. At the Thornton ball she would carry this fan, and Mr. Thornfield would see that she had accepted his gift, his message. As she drifted off to sleep, Eleanor reflected on the day's events. In the space of a few hours, her courtship with Mr. Thornfield had accelerated dramatically. From proper public interactions to secret notes and meaningful gifts. The rules of Victorian society still constrained them, but they had found ways to communicate beneath the surface, using the very tools designed to maintain propriety to express deeper feelings. You, tucked in your modern bed, might find it all absurdly complicated. Why not just say what you feel? Why the elaborate codes and signals? But perhaps there's something to be said for a society that valued restraint, that understood the power of subtlety. when every glance, every gesture carried weight. Nothing was casual, nothing thoughtless. In a world of instant messages and swipe-right dating, maybe we've lost something of that delicious anticipation, that careful consideration before expression. The Victorians may have taken it to extremes, but the principle remains. What's difficult to obtain is often more highly valued. Sleep well, dreaming of a time when a simple fan could speak volumes, when flowers carried messages, and when a chance to say someone's Christian name felt as intimate as a kiss does today. The Thornton Ball awaits in our next chapter, the highlight of Eleanor's season, where dances are promised, reputations are made and broken, and the language of the ballroom brings its own set of thrills and perils. Victorian courtship is about to move from the drawing room to the dance floor, where new rules and new opportunities await our couple. The week before the Thornton Ball was a flurry of preparation for Eleanor. This wasn't just any social event, it was the event of the early season, the one where reputations were cemented and courtships either flourished or withered under society's collective gaze. "Your dance card must be properly managed," her mother instructed over breakfast 3 days before the ball. "Accept no more than 2 dances from any gentleman, including Mr. Thornfield." Eleanor looked up from her toast. "Even though he's escorted us to the Phillips' soirée." "Especially because of that," her mother replied firmly. "Society is already noting his particular attention. To dance more than twice would suggest an understanding exists between you." That was Victorian code for "everyone will think you're practically engaged," which would be scandalous without a formal announcement. Unlike today, where you might post a relationship status update or introduce someone as your boyfriend after a few dates, Victorians moved at a glacial pace through carefully defined stages. "And what of Mr. Darlington? He's called 3 times now." Eleanor couldn't keep the reluctance from her voice. "His family connections are impeccable," her mother said pointedly. "You would do well to encourage him," Eleanor sighed. The marriage market aspect of Victorian courtship was inescapable. Mr. Segham. Darlington might make her uncomfortable, but his social standing made him a good prospect in her mother's eyes. The morning of the ball dawned with unexpected sunshine streaming through London's perpetual haze. Eleanor woke early, too nervous to sleep. Tonight would be different from dinner parties or musical evenings. Tonight she would dance with Mr. Thornfield, their bodies moving in choreographed patterns that, while rigidly proper, allowed for a closeness rare in Victorian society. "You're awake already, miss?" Martha asked, entering with the morning water. "Excited for tonight, are we?" "Anxious might be a better word," Eleanor admitted, sitting up in bed. Martha grinned. "Well, we've got your best gown ready. You'll outshine every girl there, if you don't mind my saying so." Preparations for a ball made dinner party. Preparations look casual in comparison. Eleanor spent the entire day getting ready, not because she was vain, but because Victorian beauty standards demanded it. First came the bath, this time with special French-milled soap scented with roses. Then a rigorous hair washing, a weekly event at most in Victorian times, followed by hours of drying by the fire. No hairdryers here, just patience and strategic placement near heat sources. Lunch was light, barely a few bites, because tonight's corset would be laced tighter than usual. By mid-afternoon, the serious preparations began. "Arms up," Martha instructed, lowering the corset around Eleanor's chemise-covered torso. The first pull of the laces made Eleanor gasp. Must it be so tight? Ball gowns are cut smaller than day dresses. Miss, Martha explained, pulling again, especially in the waist. By the sixth pull, Eleanor could only take shallow breaths from the very top of her lungs. Her waist was compressed to what modern eyes would consider an unhealthy, even dangerous degree. But in 1862, a tiny waist was the foundation of feminine beauty, worth a few crushed ribs and the occasional fainting spell. Now for the petticoats, Martha said, seemingly oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort. Layer after layer went over the corset and crinoline, each adding weight, each more elaborate than the last. The outermost petticoat was adorned with lace and ribbons despite the fact that no one would see it. That was Victorian fashion for you. Beauty extended to the unseen layers. Finally it was time for the ball gown itself. Eleanor had chosen a pale blue silk with delicate silver embroidery. The bodice was cut lower than her day dresses, though still modest by modern standards, with short sleeves that left her arms bare from just below the shoulder, one of the few instances where Victorian women could show some skin. "You look beautiful, miss," Martha said, stepping back to admire her work, like something from a fairy story. Eleanor turned to the mirror. The girl who stared back looked ethereal, almost otherworldly. Pale skin, fashionably so. Tiny waist, voluminous skirts that seemed to float around her. Her hair was arranged in elaborate curls with small silk flowers woven throughout. "The final touch," Martha said, presenting Eleanor with her fan, the one now bearing Mr. Thornfield's book charm. Eleanor took it, running her finger over the tiny silver book. "Thank you, Martha." "Now remember what your mother taught you," Martha said with a wink. "Fan language is powerful in a ballroom." When Eleanor descended the stairs, her parents were waiting in the entry hall. Her father looked up from his pocket watch and stared, momentarily speechless. "My dear," he said finally, "you're a vision." Her mother circled her appraisingly. "The neckline sits well. The waist could be tighter, but it will do. Remember your posture throughout the evening, Eleanor. No slouching even during the longest dances." As if slouching were possible in a corset this tight, Eleanor thought, but didn't say. Their carriage joined the line of vehicles approaching Thornton House. Gas lamps illuminated the grand entrance, where footmen in elaborate livery assisted ladies from their carriages. Music drifted from the open windows, along with the gentle murmur of polite conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. "Now remember," her mother whispered as they approached the receiving line, "your dance card should include a mix of established gentlemen and new acquaintances. Too many dances with familiar partners suggests limited appeal. Too many with strangers suggests improper eagerness." Eleanor nodded automatically. The rules were endless, contradictory, and exhausting. Imagine if modern dating apps came with 300-page instruction manuals on exactly how to swipe, when to message, and what photos to post, all with the threat of social ruin if you got it wrong. The Thornton ballroom took Eleanor's breath away, what little breath her corset allowed. Massive crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across polished floors. Hothouse flowers filled every corner, their heady scent mixing with perfume, cologne, and the subtle undertone of perspiration from dancers who had already completed several sets. Along one wall, chairs were arranged for chaperones and older ladies. The opposite wall featured long windows opening onto a terrace, offering blessed relief from the heat of the ballroom. A raised platform held the orchestra, at least 20 musicians in formal attire. Almost immediately Eleanor was approached by a young man she recognised from the Chamberlain dinner. "Miss Hartwell," he bowed slightly, "might I request your name on my dance card for the first quadrille?" And so it began. The careful negotiation of the dance card, a small booklet attached to her wrist by a silk cord. Each dance of the evening was pre-printed on its pages, with space beside each for a gentleman's name. Filling this card was a delicate balance of strategy, obligation, and genuine preference. Eleanor accepted the young man's request, then navigated through the crowd with her mother, exchanging greetings and accepting more dance requests. Mr. Darlington found her almost immediately, securing the first waltz with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look enchanting tonight, Miss Hartwell," he said, standing slightly too close. "That shade of blue is celestial." "Thank you, Mr. Darlington," Eleanor replied, taking a small step back. "You're most kind." "I shall count the minutes until our dance," he said, his gaze intense enough to make her uncomfortable. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted. Mr. Buisette, Thornfield's. "Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell," he greeted them with a bow. "You both look radiant this evening." Eleanor's pulse quickened at the sight of him in formal evening attire. Black tailcoat, white waistcoat, pristine gloves. His cravat was tied in the most fashionable style, and his hair was neatly combed, though one lock rebelliously curled over his forehead. "Mr. Thornfield," her mother acknowledged. "How fortunate to encounter you early in the evening. Eleanor's card is filling rapidly." This was her mother's none too subtle way of telling him to stake his claim before all the dances were spoken for. "In that case," he said with a slight smile, "might I request the honour of the supper dance, Miss Hartwell? And perhaps the final waltz as well." The supper dance, the set immediately preceding the meal, was particularly significant. The gentleman who partnered a lady for this dance would escort her to supper afterward, allowing for actual conversation. And the final waltz was equally meaningful, a statement of serious interest. "I would be delighted," Eleanor replied, offering her dance card and pencil. As he wrote his name in the appropriate spaces, she noticed him glance at the charm on her fan. The corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly, a private acknowledgement of their secret. By the time the orchestra struck up the first quadrille, Eleanor's card was full, a relief and a triumph. An empty dance card was a public humiliation no young woman wanted to endure. Her first partner was perfectly polite but utterly forgettable, one of dozens of young men making the rounds of the season in search of a suitable wife. The steps of the quadrille were complex enough to prevent much conversation, which was probably for the best since he seemed to have nothing to say beyond comments about the weather. The second dance brought Mr. Darlington. From the moment he took her gloved hand, Eleanor felt tense. He held her slightly too close during the turns, his fingers pressing a fraction too firmly against her waist. "You dance divinely, Miss Hartwell," he murmured, his face uncomfortably near hers during a promenade. "Thank you," she replied, subtly increasing the distance between them. "The orchestra is exceptional tonight." "I've called it your home 3 times now," he continued, ignoring her attempt to redirect the conversation. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." Eleanor's chest tightened, and not just from the corset. His tone held an edge of accusation that was most improper. "My mother and I maintain a busy social calendar," she said carefully. "We're rarely at home these days." "Yet you seem to find time for Thornfield," he observed, his smile not reaching his eyes. She was saved from responding by the dance formation, which temporarily separated them. When they came together again, she deliberately kept the conversation to the most banal topics. The decorations, the guest list, the weather yet again. When the dance ended, he held her hand a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Until next time, Miss Hartwell." She curtsied briefly and retreated to her mother's side, subtly flexing her fingers to dispel the unpleasant sensation of his grip. "Mr. Darlington seems quite taken with you," her mother observed. "He seems intense," Eleanor replied cautiously. "Intensity can indicate passion," her mother said, "not an undesirable quality in a husband." Eleanor bit back a response. What did her mother know of passion? Her marriage to Eleanor's father had been arranged for financial security and social standing, the Victorian ideal of a sensible match. The evening progressed through country dances, another quadrille, and a lively polka. Eleanor's feet ached in her satin slippers, and her corset seemed to tighten with each passing hour. Yet the anticipation of the supper dance kept her spirits high. When the orchestra announced the set before supper, she found Mr. Thornfield waiting for her at the edge of the dance floor. "Miss Hartwell," he said, offering his arm, "I believe this dance is mine." It was a waltz, the most romantic and at one time scandalous of ballroom dances. Though fully accepted by the 1860s, it still carried a hint of daring, being one of the few dances where a couple remained in closed position throughout. As Mr. Thornfield's hand settled lightly at her waist and he took her gloved hand in his, Eleanor felt a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with propriety, and everything to do with being close to him. They began to move with the music, turning in the prescribed circles around the floor. "You look beautiful tonight," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers, "though I imagine you're counting the hours until you can remove that corset." Eleanor nearly missed a step in surprise. Gentlemen simply didn't acknowledge the existence of ladies' undergarments, even indirectly. "Mr. Thornfield," she gasped, half scandalized, half amused. "Forgive me," he said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. "I have sisters. I'm well aware of the tortures society inflicts on women in the name of fashion." "It's worth the discomfort," she replied, "for special occasions." "Is this a special occasion?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "I believe it might be," she admitted. They danced in silence for a moment, the music swelling around them. Despite the dozens of couples on the floor, the hundreds of eyes watching, Eleanor felt as though they were somehow alone, enclosed in a bubble of understanding. "I've been reading Tennyson," she said finally, "the volume you gave me." "And? What did you think of the passages I marked?" "I think," she said carefully, "that you have unconventional ideas about a woman's place in society." He smiled. "Is that a criticism or an observation?" "Neither, perhaps a hope." The dance ended too soon. As the final notes faded, Mr. Thornfield offered his arm to escort her to supper. This was the expected progression. The dance partner led his lady to the supper room, where they would share a meal and conversation. The supper room was arranged with small tables, allowing for semi-private conversations that would be impossible in the ballroom. Still, propriety was maintained. No couple sat completely alone, and chaperones circulated continuously. Mr. Thornfield secured a table in a relatively quiet corner and fetched a plate for Eleanor, another rare opportunity for him to demonstrate attentiveness. Victorian ladies never served themselves at public functions. "Thank you," she said, as he placed before her a modest selection of cold meats, fruit, and a small pastry. He sat across from her, not too close, but close enough for conversation without being overheard. "Have you been enjoying the ball, Miss Hartwell?" "Very much," she replied, "though I confess the continuous dancing is rather tiring." "Perhaps we might step onto the terrace after supper," he suggested, for a breath of fresh air. Eleanor hesitated. The terrace would be chaperoned, of course, but it offered more privacy than the ballroom or supper room. Going there with Mr. Thornfield would be a signal to society that she welcomed his particular attention. That would be lovely, she decided. Their supper conversation ranged from music to literature to the latest exhibit at the British Museum. Safer topics than personal feelings, but revealing in their own way. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying his company, not just tolerating it as a social necessity. "Shall we?" he asked when they had finished eating, offering his arm once more. The terrace was illuminated by paper lanterns, casting a soft glow over couples strolling along its length. Chaperones stationed at strategic intervals ensured nothing improper occurred, but the space between them allowed for moments of relative privacy. The night air was blessedly cool after the heat of the ballroom. Eleanor took a deep breath, as deep as her corset allowed, and felt some of the evening's tension leave her shoulders. "Better?" Mr. Thornfield asked, noting her relaxed expression. "Much," she admitted, "though I shouldn't complain. These evenings are what we prepare for, after all." "The artificial courtship rituals of polite society," he said with a hint of irony, "designed to ensure suitable matches while preventing any genuine understanding before marriage." Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by his frankness. "You sound critical of the system you're participating in, Mr. Thornfield." "James," he reminded her quietly, "when we can speak freely." "James," she repeated, the name still feeling intimate on her lips. "And yes, we are both playing by society's rules, aren't we?" "With some creative interpretations," he said, nodding toward her fan with its book charm. "I find the rules can be navigated by those willing to look beyond them." They had reached the far end of the terrace, partially concealed by a large potted palm, not truly private, but offering a moment of reduced scrutiny. "Eleanor," he said softly, using her given name for the first time, "I need to be clear about my intentions." Her heart raced. Was this it? The declaration that would move their courtship to the next formal stage? "I intend to call on your father next week," he continued, "to request his permission to court you officially." Not quite a proposal, but a significant step, the formal acknowledgement of his interest, moving their relationship from the realm of possibility to stated intention. "I would welcome that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, his relief evident. "I had hoped, but one can never be certain, especially when other gentlemen are showing such marked interest." "You mean Mr. Darlington?" Eleanor said. "Among others, though he seems particularly persistent." Eleanor hesitated, then decided to share her concerns. "He makes me uncomfortable. There's something improper about his attention." James frowned. "Has he been inappropriate?" "Nothing I can specifically identify," she admitted. "Just a feeling, and Martha mentioned he's been asking questions about me among the servants." "That is concerning," James said, his expression darkening. "Perhaps your father should be informed." "Perhaps," Eleanor agreed, "though I have no proof of anything beyond persistent attention." "I'll speak with your father regardless," James said, and make my intentions clear. That often discourages less serious suitors." The sound of the orchestra tuning up drifted from the ballroom, the signal that dancing would resume soon. "We should return," Eleanor said reluctantly. "My mother will be looking for me." "Of course." He offered his arm once more. "But I believe you promised me the final waltz as well." "I did indeed," she smiled, placing her hand on his arm. They rejoined the crowd in the ballroom just as the next set was forming. Eleanor's dance card called for a country dance with an elderly baronet, a courtesy inclusion suggested by her mother. As James escorted her to her partner, he squeezed her hand briefly, another of those small private communications that meant everything. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of music, movement, and meaningless conversation. Eleanor danced each dance dutifully, smiled at compliments, and answered polite inquiries, but her mind was fixed on the final waltz and on James's declaration of intent. When the orchestra announced the last dance of the evening, she found herself suddenly nervous. The final waltz was weighted with significance. Everyone would be watching. Everyone would understand that Mr. Thornfield had claimed this symbolic position. He appeared at her side as if conjured by her thoughts. "Miss Hartwell," he said formally, conscious of the eyes upon them, "may I have the honour?" "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thornfield," she replied, equally formal. As they took their positions on the floor, Eleanor was acutely aware of her mother's satisfied expression, of Mr. Darlington's scowl from the edge of the room, of the speculative glances from other guests. By tomorrow, their names would be linked in the gossip that fueled London society. The music began, a lilting, romantic melody that seemed to envelop them as they moved across the floor. Despite the propriety of their hold, the carefully maintained space between their bodies, there was an intimacy to this dance that couldn't be denied. "Are you concerned about the speculation this will cause?" James asked quietly as they turned. "No," Eleanor replied honestly. "Are you?" "I welcome it," he said. "It aligns with my intentions." As the final notes of the waltz faded, James bowed and Eleanor curtsied, the formal conclusion to their dance and to the evening. But the look that passed between them held the promise of what was to come. His formal request to court her, the shifting of their relationship from possibility to probability, the first true step toward a life together. In the carriage ride home, Eleanor's mother was unusually quiet, simply patting her daughter's hand with a satisfied smile. Her father dozed in the corner, exhausted by an evening of polite conversation with business associates and their wives. When they reached home, Eleanor was never more grateful for Martha's quick fingers as she unlaced the tortuous corset and helped her out of the layers of her ball gown. As the pressure released, she took her first deep breath in hours. "Well, miss," Martha asked, helping Eleanor into her nightgown, "was it worth the discomfort?" Eleanor thought of James's declaration on the terrace, of the final waltz, of the future suddenly taking shape before her. "Yes," she said simply, "it was." As she slipped between the cool sheets of her bed, her body aching from hours of dancing in restrictive clothing, Eleanor felt a contentment that transcended physical discomfort. The elaborate dance of Victorian courtship was exhausting, frustrating, and often ridiculous. But tonight, it had brought her one step closer to a partnership based on genuine connection. And you, drifting towards sleep in your comfortable modern bed, might find it hard to imagine enduring such discomfort and restriction for the sake of courtship. No corsets crushing your ribs, no dance cards limiting your choices, no chaperones monitoring your every interaction. Yet perhaps there's something to be said for a system that valued patience and progression, that understood the power of anticipation and the beauty of gradual revelation. Sleep well, dreaming of ballrooms where every step, every glance, every touch of hands carried meaning. Tomorrow we'll follow Eleanor as her courtship with James Thornfield moves into its next phase, the formal, acknowledged pursuit that would eventually lead to engagement, assuming, of course, that Mr. Darlington doesn't have other plans. True to his word, James called on Eleanor's father the very next week. Unlike the social calls paid to ladies of the house, this was a business meeting between gentlemen, private, serious, and potentially life-altering. Eleanor spent that afternoon in agony, confined to the drawing-room with her mother and her embroidery, straining to hear any sound from her father's study where the men were closeted. "Stop fidgeting, Eleanor," her mother scolded. "Your father is a reasonable man. If Mr. Thornfield's circumstances are as reported, there should be no impediment." That was the Victorian reality. Love was secondary to circumstances. A gentleman needed to prove he could support a wife in the manner to which she was accustomed before any romantic considerations entered the equation. "What if father finds some reason to object?" Eleanor asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Her mother set down her needlework with a sigh. "Mr. Thornfield has an income of approximately £2,000 per year, respectable family connections and no known vices. Unless he's concealing some catastrophic secret, your father will likely grant permission for a formal courtship." The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When the study door finally opened, Eleanor held her breath, trying to interpret the muffled sounds of farewell in the front hall. Her father appeared in the drawing-room doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Thornfield has departed," he announced. "And?" her mother prompted. A small smile broke through his serious demeanour. "And I have given him permission to court Eleanor formally." Eleanor's heart leapt, though she maintained her outward composure. A lady never showed excessive emotion, even at life-changing news. "He seems a sensible young man," her father continued, settling into his favourite chair. "Good head for business. His investments are sound, his property unencumbered. I see no reason to object to the match should it progress to that stage." That was high praise from her practical father, an acknowledgement that James met the financial and social requirements for a suitable husband. "Did he—" Eleanor hesitated. "Did Mr. Thornfield mention when he might call again?" Her father's eyes softened as they met hers. "Tomorrow afternoon. He asked specifically if he might take you for a carriage ride in the park, properly chaperoned." Of course. A carriage ride. This was a significant step in Victorian courtship, a public declaration of serious intent. Couples seen driving together in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour were understood to be in their final stages before engagement. "That would be lovely," Eleanor said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I shall accompany you," her mother declared. "A mother is the most appropriate chaperone for such excursions." The following day brought sunshine and mild temperatures, perfect weather for a park outing. Eleanor chose her second-best day dress. Wearing one's finest for a mere carriage ride would appear too eager, and a bonnet that framed her face becomingly without being ostentatious. "The blue parasol, I think," her mother decided as they prepared to receive their visitor. "It complements your complexion." parasol served dual purposes in Victorian courtship, protecting a lady's skin from the sun, pale complexions being fashionable, while providing a prop for subtle flirtation. The way a woman held her parasol, twirled it, or tapped its tip could convey messages to an attentive suitor. When James arrived, he was driving a handsome open carriage, not showy but obviously well appointed. The choice of vehicle was itself a statement. Prosperous but not flashy, elegant but not pretentious. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell," he greeted them with a bow. "I hope I find you well today." "Quite well. Thank you, Mr. Thornfield," Eleanor's mother replied. "The weather seems perfect for our excursion." The seating arrangement in the carriage was dictated by propriety. Eleanor and her mother on the rear-facing seat, James alone on the forward-facing seat. This positioning ensured that even in a private carriage, proper distance was maintained. As they set off toward Hyde Park, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of excitement and constraint. They were now officially courting. James had her father's permission to pursue her, yet they remained bound by rigid rules of behaviour. "I trust your meeting with my father was not too intimidating, Mr. Thornfield," Eleanor said, opening her parasol as they turned onto a sunnier street. "Your father is a sensible man with his daughter's best interests at heart," James replied diplomatically. "I respect his thoroughness." What went unsaid was that thoroughness had likely included detailed inquiries into James's finances, family connections, and personal habits. Victorian fathers didn't give their daughters away lightly, not when marriage meant the transfer of legal authority from father to husband. Hyde Park was crowded with fashionable society taking their afternoon constitutionals. Elegant carriages circled the drives while well-dressed pedestrians strolled the pathways. Everyone watched everyone else, noting who was seen with whom, what they wore, how they interacted. "Lady Worthington and her daughter," Eleanor's mother observed as they passed another carriage. "Did you know Miss Worthington received an offer from Lord Penley last week? Quite the match." This was typical conversation during such outings, a running commentary on the social status and matrimonial prospects of everyone they encountered. For modern ears it might sound like gossip, but in Victorian society it was market research, keeping track of who was available, who was spoken for, and what constituted a good match. "Miss Hartwell," James said, turning the conversation, "I've been reading that volume of Browning you recommended. I find his perspective on love quite revolutionary." Eleanor brightened at the shift to a more interesting topic. His belief that love should be based on mutual respect and shared intellect, rather than mere convenience, is rather modern, isn't it? "Eleanor," her mother cautioned, "perhaps Mr. Thornfield would prefer to discuss something less academic. The new construction along the Serpentine, perhaps?" James caught Eleanor's eye briefly, a shared moment of understanding passing between them. "Actually, Mrs. Hartwell, I find Miss Eleanor's literary insights quite refreshing. Too few young ladies form their own opinions on what they read." Her mother looked somewhat taken aback, but not displeased. A gentleman expressing admiration for her daughter's mind was unexpected but not unwelcome. As they completed their circuit of the park, Eleanor was acutely aware of the many eyes watching their progress. By evening word would spread through London society that Miss Hartwell and Mr. Thornfield were officially courting. The carriage ride was both a private pleasure and a public announcement. "I wonder if I might call tomorrow," James said, as he handed them down at their front door after the drive. I've acquired tickets for the new exhibition at the Royal Academy. Perhaps you both might enjoy viewing the artworks." Another public outing, another statement of serious intent. Eleanor glanced at her mother, who nodded her approval. "We would be delighted," Eleanor replied, her formal words belying the flutter of excitement in her chest. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. James called at the Hartwell home 3 times a week, the maximum frequency permitted without suggesting improper eagerness. Each Tuesday and Thursday he spent exactly 1 hour in the drawing room, conversing primarily with Eleanor while her mother maintained a watchful presence. Once a week, usually on Saturday, he escorted them on an outing, a museum, a concert, a lecture, or another carriage ride. Always educational, always respectable, always public. But the most meaningful development in their courtship came in the form of letters. Victorian etiquette permitted correspondence between a young lady and her official suitor, provided the initial letters were read by her parents. Once they were satisfied with the gentleman's propriety, parents often relaxed this supervision, allowing for more private communication. "A letter for you, Miss Eleanor," Martha announced one morning, 3 weeks into the formal courtship. "From Mr. Thornfield. Your mother has already reviewed it." Eleanor accepted the envelope with studied casualness, though her fingers itched to tear it open immediately. Only when she was alone in her room did she break the seal and unfold the thick cream paper. "My dear Miss Hartwell, I hope this letter finds you well. Our conversation yesterday regarding Browning's Rabbi Ben Ezra left me with further thoughts I wish to share. While I understand convention dictates that letters between us should focus primarily on arrangements for future meetings or polite inquiries after health, I find myself hoping that we might, perhaps, establish a correspondence of greater substance. Your insights into Browning's perspective on aging and wisdom were both perceptive and original. I wonder if you might have read his By the Fireside as well. It offers, I think, a beautiful vision of what marriage might be at its best, a true partnership of minds and hearts growing together through life's journey. I look forward to our visit to the Botanical Gardens on Saturday. Until then, I remain your devoted servant, James Thornfield. It was a masterpiece of Victorian letter writing, proper enough to pass a mother's inspection while still conveying deeper meaning. The reference to By the Fireside, Browning's love poem about a couple who had found true intellectual and emotional partnership, was particularly telling. Eleanor immediately sat at her writing desk to compose a reply. Letter writing was an art form in Victorian courtship, an opportunity to express thoughts and feelings that might be inappropriate to voice in person, all couched in acceptable language. Dear Mr. Thornfield, I thank you for your kind letter. I am indeed familiar with By the Fireside and find its vision of marriage most appealing. So many view matrimony as merely a social or economic arrangement, but surely there must be more to a lifelong union than convenience. I have been reading George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss again, and find myself contemplating how differently Maggie's life might have unfolded had she been permitted to develop her intellect rather than having it suppressed as unladylike. Do you not think that minds, like gardens, flourish best when cultivated rather than constrained? I, too, look forward to our excursion on Saturday. The Botanical Gardens should be most educational. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Hartwell. She sealed the letter, knowing her mother would read it before it was sent. The references were subtle enough to pass inspection while conveying her agreement with James's vision of marriage as an intellectual and emotional partnership. This exchange began a correspondence that rapidly became the most meaningful aspect of their courtship. In person, they were always observed, always performing for society. In letters, they could share thoughts, ideas, and gradually feelings. Of course, Victorian love letters never stated affection directly, not in the early stages. There were no I love yous or passionate declarations. Instead, sentiments were conveyed through literary references, philosophical musings, and careful word choice. By the 6th week of their courtship, their letters had grown longer and more frequent. James wrote every other day, and Eleanor replied to each letter promptly. Her mother, satisfied with the propriety of their exchange, had stopped reading them after the first few weeks. "My dear Eleanor," the formal Miss Hartwell had been dropped in their private correspondence, "I find myself thinking often of our conversation in the botanical gardens regarding the cultivation of exotic blooms. How some flowers thrive only when given the precise conditions they require, the right soil, the right amount of sun, the right companion plantings. Is it not the same with people? Some flourish in the rigid structure of London society, while others require a different environment to reach their full potential. I sometimes wonder if you, like those tropical orchids we admired, might bloom even more brilliantly in a setting that appreciates your unique qualities. I have been giving much thought to my property in Derbyshire. The house is modest by some standards, but the library is extensive, and the gardens have great potential. It is situated near enough to a village to prevent isolation, yet far enough to provide tranquility. The neighbouring families are few but intellectually engaging. Forgive me if I speak too plainly. Our correspondence has become precious to me, as have our meetings, limited though they are by convention. I remain, as ever, your devoted James. Eleanor read this letter several times, her heart beating faster with each reading. This was as close to a declaration as Victorian propriety allowed before a formal proposal. James was describing a potential future together, gauging her reaction to the life he could offer her away from London society. She composed her reply carefully, aware that her response would signal her readiness, or reluctance, to move toward engagement. Dear James, your description of your Derbyshire home sounds most appealing. I have always found the countryside more conducive to reflection and genuine connection than London's endless social obligations. A good library is, to my mind, essential for contentment. As for gardens, I believe I might have some modest talent for cultivation given the opportunity. My mother's small conservatory has been my particular project these past years. I, too, have come to treasure our correspondence. The ability to share thoughts freely is a rare gift in a world so bound by convention. With sincere regard, Eleanor. It was, by Victorian standards, practically a declaration of love. By telling James she found his home appealing and could envision herself tending its gardens, she was essentially saying she could imagine herself as its mistress, as his wife. The courtship seemed to be progressing perfectly toward its natural conclusion. But there was one complication that increasingly cast a shadow over Eleanor's happiness: Mr. Darlington. Despite James's clear position as Eleanor's official suitor, Mr. Darlington persisted in his attentions. He called at the Hartwell home regularly, though Eleanor's mother increasingly claimed they were not at home to him. He appeared at every social function they attended, always managing to secure a dance or a moment of conversation. "I noticed Thornfield escorted you to the Henderson concert last week," he commented during one such encounter. "How domestic he seems, quite the settled gentleman." There was something in his tone, a subtle mockery that made Eleanor uncomfortable. "Mr. Thornfield is very thoughtful," she replied neutrally. "Thoughtful, yes," Mr. Darlington smiled without warmth, "and cautious, very cautious about his investments." Before Eleanor could respond to this odd statement, he had moved on, leaving her with a vague sense of unease. "I don't like the way Mr. Darlington looks at you," Martha commented as she brushed Eleanor's hair that night. "There's something not right there." "He seems persistent," Eleanor agreed, "even though it must be clear to everyone that my attentions are engaged elsewhere." "More than persistent," Martha said darkly. "Cook's nephew works in the Darlington kitchen. Says Mr. Darlington has been asking all sorts of questions about Mr. Thornfield. Where he goes, who he sees. Not natural, that." This was concerning. The servants' network was an invisible but powerful information channel in Victorian society. If Mr. Darlington was using it to gather intelligence on James, his interest went beyond normal competitive courtship. "Has he discovered anything of note?" Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. "Not that I've heard," Martha replied. "Mr. Thornfield seems a proper gentleman with nothing to hide. But still, it ain't right. One gentleman prying into another's business like that." Eleanor mentioned the matter to James during their next carriage ride, her mother dozing lightly across from them, a rare moment of semi-privacy. "Mr. Darlington has been making inquiries about you," she said quietly, "through the servants." James frowned. "That's unusual, and somewhat concerning. Has he approached you directly?" "Nothing I could specifically object to," Eleanor admitted. "Just persistent attention despite clear discouragement." "I shall speak with your father," James decided. "He should be aware of this behaviour." "Is there something Mr. Darlington might discover?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. "Some reason for his interest in your affairs?" "Nothing dishonourable," James assured her. "My business and personal life are transparent. But I don't care for the idea of being investigated, particularly by a man who continues to pursue you despite our understanding." Their conversation was cut short as her mother stirred, but the incident left Eleanor troubled. Victorian society operated on strict codes of honour among gentlemen. Mr. Darlington's behaviour, investigating a rival, persisting in attentions to a lady clearly being courted by another, violated those codes. The matter came to a head unexpectedly the following week. James had taken Eleanor and her mother to a small gallery exhibition. As they examined a landscape painting, Eleanor sensed someone approaching from behind. "Miss Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell," Mr. Darlington's voice was smooth as silk. "What a pleasant surprise! And Mr. Thornfield as well. How cosy." James turned, his expression polite but cool. "Mr. Darlington?" "I was just admiring this painting," Mr. Darlington continued, gesturing to the landscape. "Reminds me of the view from Thornfield's property in Derbyshire. You visited, of course, Mrs. Hartwell. Charming place, though I understand the neighbouring estate is considerably grander." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. The reference to James's home was too specific, too pointed. "We have not yet had the pleasure," her mother replied, clearly puzzled by the question. "No? How curious." Mr. Darlington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "One would think, given the progression of events, that you would have inspected your daughter's future home. The implication was clear and improper. Engagements were not discussed publicly before they were official. By suggesting that Eleanor and James were already planning marriage, Mr. Darlington was attempting to create scandal. James stepped forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Darlington, I believe you've forgotten yourself. Your comments border on the inappropriate." "Do they?" Mr. Darlington's eyes narrowed. "I merely express concern for Miss Hartwell's future happiness, especially given certain rumours about your business ventures in Liverpool." Eleanor felt her mother stiffen beside her. James's face remained impassive, but she noticed a muscle working in his jaw. "I assure you, my business affairs are sound," he said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us." He guided Eleanor and her mother away, leaving Mr. Darlington standing alone by the painting. "What was that about Liverpool?" her mother whispered as they moved to another room. "Nothing of consequence," James replied. "Mr. Darlington appears to be grasping at straws to create discord. I have investments in Liverpool, as in several other cities, all of which are completely above board." But the seed of doubt had been planted, exactly as Mr. Darlington had intended. For the remainder of the exhibition, Eleanor's mother was quieter than usual, her expression thoughtful. That evening, Eleanor overheard her parents talking in her father's study as she passed by. "Should make further inquiries about these Liverpool investments," her mother was saying. "Mr. Darlington seemed quite certain there was something amiss." "Darlington is clearly attempting to undermine Thornfield's suit," her father replied. "I've already investigated the man's finances thoroughly. There was nothing concerning about his Liverpool holdings. Still, Robert, it would be prudent to verify. Eleanor's future security depends on it." Eleanor moved away from the door, troubled. Victorian marriages were, at their core, financial arrangements. The possibility of unsound investments could derail even the most promising courtship. That night, she wrote to James. "Dear James, I fear Mr. Darlington's insinuations may have unsettled my mother. While my father seems satisfied with his initial inquiries into your circumstances, there is talk of further investigation regarding your Liverpool interests. Please understand that I place no stock in Mr. Darlington's claims. I write only so that you may be prepared for potential questions from my father. With concern, Eleanor." His reply came the very next morning, delivered by his groom rather than the regular post suggesting urgency. "My dearest Eleanor, thank you for your warning. Please do not trouble yourself on this account. Your father is welcome to investigate my Liverpool investments as thoroughly as he wishes. They are modest but sound. Warehouses near the docks, leased to reputable shipping companies. Mr. Darlington's behaviour suggests desperation. I believe he has discovered there is nothing questionable in my business or personal affairs, and is now attempting to create doubt through insinuation rather than fact. I had planned to wait another 2 weeks before speaking with your father again, but perhaps it would be best to accelerate matters. With your permission, I shall call on him tomorrow to address these concerns directly and to make my final intentions clear. Until then, I remain yours devotedly, James. Eleanor pressed the letter to her heart, understanding its significance. James was going to propose, formally, officially, sooner than planned, to prevent Mr. Darlington's machinations from gaining traction. Victorian courtships typically lasted several months before progressing to engagement. Theirs had been relatively brief, just over 7 weeks, but circumstances sometimes necessitated adjustments to the traditional timeline. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Eleanor found herself hovering between anxiety and excitement. By this time tomorrow, her future might be decided, either moving forward toward marriage to James, or derailed by Mr. Darlington's mysterious allegations. You, in your modern bed, might find all this intrigue and formality exhausting. Today, you can simply block someone's number if they're causing problems in your relationship. But in Victorian England, courtship was a public performance as much as a private connection, and the audience could significantly impact the outcome. Sleep well, dreaming of a time when a simple letter could convey volumes of feeling beneath its proper surface, when gardens and libraries were metaphors for shared futures, and when even the most promising romance could be threatened by whispered insinuations in art galleries. In our final chapter, we'll discover whether James's gambit succeeds, whether formal engagement awaits Eleanor, or whether Mr. Darlington's mysterious campaign will disrupt their carefully cultivated courtship. The Victorian marriage market is approaching its conclusion, but the final moves in this high-stakes game remain to be played. Eleanor barely slept that night, her mind cycling through possibilities. What exactly was Mr. Darlington implying about James's Liverpool investments? Why was he so determined to disrupt their courtship? And most importantly, what would her father decide when James called tomorrow? Unlike modern relationships where couples make decisions independently, Victorian courtships required family approval at every stage. A father could end even the most promising match if he had concerns about a suitor's character or finances. Morning arrived with grey skies and gentle rain, fitting weather for Eleanor's uncertain mood. She dressed carefully in a modest day dress of deep blue, hoping to project calm confidence despite her inner turmoil. "Mr. Thornfield has requested a meeting with your father at 11, her mother informed her at breakfast. "I believe we can guess the nature of his visit." Eleanor nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the flutter in her stomach. "Yes, mother." "Your father may wish to speak with you afterward," her mother continued, stirring her tea. "Whatever his decision, I expect you to accept it gracefully." This was the Victorian reality, a stark reminder that for all the romantic elements of courtship, marriage remained fundamentally a family decision, not an individual one. A daughter's preference was considered, but not prioritized above financial security or social standing. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick with excruciating slowness as 11 o'clock approached. Eleanor sat in the drawing room with her embroidery, making such a mess of her stitches that she would need to unpick most of them later. Finally the doorbell rang. From her position, Eleanor could see James being admitted and shown to her father's study. He glanced toward the drawing room as he passed, offering a small, reassuring smile that eased some of her anxiety. The door to the study closed, and silence fell over the house. Even the servants seemed to move more quietly, aware of the significance of the meeting taking place. Eleanor's mother joined her in the drawing room, her own embroidery similarly neglected as she glanced repeatedly at the clock. "Liverpool," she muttered. "I never did understand why he would invest there rather than Bristol. Bristol has much more respectable connections." "I believe the shipping companies he works with operate primarily from Liverpool," Eleanor offered, having learned this from James's letters. Her mother made a non-committal sound. "Well, your father will get to the bottom of it. Robert has an excellent head for business matters." Another half-hour of agonizing silence. Eleanor barely slept that night, her mind cycling through possibilities. What exactly was Mr. Darlington implying about James's Liverpool investments? Why was he so determined to disrupt their courtship? And most importantly, what would her father decide when James called tomorrow? Unlike modern relationships where couples make decisions independently, Victorian courtships required family approval at every stage. A father could end even the most promising match if he had concerns about a suitor's character or finances. Morning arrived with grey skies and gentle rain, fitting weather for Eleanor's uncertain mood. She dressed carefully in a modest day dress of deep blue, hoping to project calm confidence despite her inner turmoil. "Mr. Thornfield has requested a meeting with your father at 11, her mother informed her at breakfast. "I believe we can guess the nature of his visit." Eleanor nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite the flutter in her stomach. "Yes, mother." "Your father may wish to speak with you afterward," her mother continued, stirring her tea. "Whatever his decision, I expect you to accept it gracefully." This was the Victorian reality, a stark reminder that for all the romantic elements of courtship, marriage remained fundamentally a family decision, not an individual one. A daughter's preference was considered, but not prioritized above financial security or social standing. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick with excruciating slowness as 11 o'clock approached. Eleanor sat in the drawing room with her embroidery, making such a mess of her stitches that she would need to unpick most of them later. Finally the doorbell rang. From her position, Eleanor could see James being admitted and shown to her father's study. He glanced toward the drawing room as he passed, offering a small, reassuring smile that eased some of her anxiety. The door to the study closed, and silence fell over the house. Even the servants seemed to move more quietly, aware of the significance of the meeting taking place. Eleanor's mother joined her in the drawing room, her own embroidery similarly neglected as she glanced repeatedly at the clock. "Liverpool," she muttered. "I never did understand why he would invest there rather than Bristol. Bristol has much more respectable connections." "I believe the shipping companies he works with operate primarily from Liverpool," Eleanor offered, having learned this from James's letters. Her mother made a non-committal sound. "Well, your father will get to the bottom of it. Robert has an excellent head for business matters." Another half-hour of agonizing silence passed. Eleanor could hear the low murmur of male voices from the study, but couldn't make out any words. Was that a good sign? Surely if her father was rejecting James's suit, the meeting would have ended more quickly. Finally, the study door opened. Eleanor and her mother both looked up, attempting to appear casually occupied rather than anxiously waiting. James appeared first, followed by her father. Both men were smiling, a promising sign. "Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell," her father said formally, though his eyes twinkled. "Mr. Thornfield has something he wishes to discuss with Eleanor. Perhaps we might grant them a few minutes of conversation, with the door open, of course." Her mother raised an eyebrow but nodded, setting aside her embroidery. "Very well. Eleanor, I shall be just in the morning room across the hall." This was unprecedented, allowing Eleanor and James a moment of semi-privacy. Whatever had transpired in that meeting had clearly satisfied her father completely. As her parents withdrew, James approached Eleanor, his expression a mixture of solemnity and barely concealed joy. Miss Hartwell, Eleanor, he began, taking a seat near her but not inappropriately close. I have just had a most satisfactory conversation with your father. I'm glad to hear it, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I've addressed his concerns regarding my Liverpool investments, James continued. As it happens, I was able to provide documentation proving not only their soundness, but their unusual profitability. The shipping company leasing my warehouses has recently expanded its routes to include the Americas, significantly increasing the value of the property. Eleanor nodded. Though business matters were considered beyond a lady's understanding, I'm pleased that's been clarified. There's more, James said, his voice lowering slightly, though still perfectly audible, to anyone who might be listening from the hall. I've been investigating Mr. Darlington's unusual interest in my affairs. And? Eleanor prompted when he paused. It seems Mr. Darlington has significant gambling debts, James explained. He's been seeking a wealthy marriage to resolve his financial difficulties. Your father was unaware of your dowry's precise appeal to a man in such circumstances. Eleanor's eyes widened. Her dowry was modest but respectable, certainly enough to clear the debts of a desperate man. I've provided your father with proof of these allegations, James added, from sources he trusts implicitly. Mr. Darlington will no longer be received in this house. This explained everything. Mr. Darlington's persistence despite clear discouragement, his attempts to undermine James, his increasingly desperate tactics. He hadn't been pursuing Eleanor out of genuine interest, but as a financial solution to his problems. I'm grateful you discovered this, Eleanor said sincerely. James smiled, reaching into his waistcoat pocket. With that unpleasantness addressed, I have something far more important to discuss with you. Eleanor's heart began to race as he withdrew a small velvet box, the unmistakable sign of what was to come. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, he said, his voice warm but formal, over these past weeks I have come to admire and esteem you more than any woman of my acquaintance. Your intelligence, your gentle spirit, your strength of character, all have convinced me that we might find great happiness together. He opened the box, revealing a ring with a modest but beautifully set sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Would you do me the very great honour of becoming my wife? Despite knowing this moment was coming, despite the practical discussions that had preceded it, Eleanor felt a surge of genuine emotion. This wasn't just a business arrangement or social obligation. James was offering a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection. Yes, she said simply, I would be honoured to accept. James smiled, relief and happiness evident in his expression. He carefully took the ring from its box and placed it on her finger, one of the few instances where physical contact was permitted before marriage. It was my grandmother's, he explained. The sapphire reminded me of your eyes. Before Eleanor could respond, her parents reappeared in the doorway, her father beaming and her mother wiping away a suspiciously moist eye. I take it congratulations are in order, her father said. Indeed, sir, James replied, standing to shake her father's hand. Miss Hartwell has made me the happiest of men. What followed was a flurry of activity that would be familiar to engaged couples of any era, albeit with a Victorian twist. Within days, the formal announcement appeared at the Morning Post. A marriage has been arranged and will shortly take place between Mr. James Thornfield, of Thornfield Hall, Derbyshire, and Miss Eleanor Hartwell, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Hartwell, of Grosvenor Square, London. This public declaration transformed Eleanor's social position overnight. As an engaged woman, she enjoyed new freedoms unimaginable to single girls. She could correspond with James without supervision. They could drive out together with a companion seated discreetly on the opposite side of the carriage rather than beside Eleanor. They could even, scandalously, hold hands when unobserved. "You realize," James said during one such carriage ride, their gloved fingers interlaced between them, "that once we're married, I may hold your hand whenever I wish." "How shockingly improper," Eleanor teased, squeezing his fingers gently. Her mother, sitting opposite them, pretended not to notice this display of affection. The rules relaxed somewhat for engaged couples, particularly as the wedding approached. The wedding itself was set for 3 months hence, a respectable interval allowing for adequate preparation without suggesting undue haste or delay. During this time, Eleanor devoted herself to assembling her trousseau, the collection of clothing, linens, and personal items a bride brought to her marriage. "You'll need at least 24 chemises," her mother declared, reviewing the lists with Eleanor and Martha, "and no fewer than 18 night-dresses. Plus morning gowns, day dresses, walking dresses, dinner dresses, and at least 3 ball gowns for your first season as a married woman." Martha whistled low under her breath at the sheer volume of items. "That's a lot of sewing, Mrs. Hartwell." "We'll engage additional seamstresses," her mother replied practically. "Miss Eleanor must be properly outfitted for her new position." A Victorian trousseau was more than just clothing. It was a statement of the bride's family's wealth and her preparedness for married life. Every item would be meticulously crafted, often hand-embroidered with Eleanor's initials, soon to become E.T. rather than E.H. While Eleanor focused on her trousseau, James saw to preparing their future home. Thornfield Hall in Derbyshire would be their primary residence, but he also leased a modest townhouse in London for the occasions when they needed to be in the city. "The library at Thornfield has been reorganised," he told Eleanor during one of their now daily visits. "I've added several shelves of modern novels I thought you might enjoy, and botanists' journals for the gardens." These practical preparations were the Victorian equivalent of modern couples shopping for furniture together or discussing which streaming services to share. Less romantic than love letters, perhaps, but equally important to building a life together. As the wedding approached, Eleanor found herself spending more time with James's family. His mother, a gentle widow who welcomed Eleanor warmly, and his 2 sisters, both already married with children of their own. "James has always been different from other gentlemen," his younger sister Catherine confided during a tea visit. "Even as a boy, he had no patience for artifice or empty social conventions. You'll suit him perfectly, I think." "I hope so," Eleanor replied sincerely. "He certainly thinks so," Catherine smiled. "I've never seen my brother so animated as when he speaks of you. Mother says he's written more letters in the past 3 months than in the previous 3 years combined." This glimpse into James's perspective warmed Eleanor's heart. Victorian courtship, for all its rules and formalities, didn't preclude genuine emotional connection. It just channeled it through socially acceptable outlets. One afternoon, 2 weeks before the wedding, James called at the Hartwell home with an unexpected